Shalom, friends. Welcome to another shiur in Gemara, in Talmud. We're studying Masechet Berachot, tractate blessings, and that's really what it's all about. We're learning about beautiful things and blessings in life. That's what we're looking for. I'm Eliyahu Shir, and I'm coming to you from Chesed Ve'emet. My website can be found on www.lovingkindness.co, and I'm always happy to be in touch with you. So if there's something in the shiur that you need clarification on, or you just want to discuss anything that we're learning about, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We're learning from the Koren Talmud Bavli. As you can see in front of you over here, it's a very beautiful edition which contains the original text and translation, as well as notes and halacha, pictures, photographs, and illustrations, and so on and so forth. All of these things are here to help us to make our learning easier. If while you're following the shiur, you wish to browse at the rest of the page and look at the translation that's given or anything else as we progress, please feel free to do so. Pause and look at the things and hit the pause button again and continue with the shiur. However you want to do it, enjoy the shiur. So we're on page 13b, that's Yud Gimel Amud Beis in the Hebrew, and we're on Perik Beis. We're on the second chapter now of Berachot. Now, just before we continue on from where we left off, I'm just going to go back in time a little bit, back to where we were last week at the end, so that we can follow on from the discussion that we were speaking about. Now, the Mishnah, the very first Mishnah of the second chapter of Berachot, deals with the idea of kavanah, intention, when reciting the Keriat Shema. What is a person's obligation to have intention while he recites the Keriat Shema? And this is a general principle in all mitzvah performance. What obligation do we have to have intention to perform the mitzvah if we are going to fulfill the mitzvah to its full requirements? For example, since we are approaching the Chagim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and of course Sukkot, which is my example that I really want to give at this point in time, we have to know that there are certain mitzvot that we're going to be performing, some very special, unique mitzvot. We will be shaking the lulav and esrog, we'll be sitting in a sukkah, and so on and so forth. What is my obligation to concentrate and have intention, kavanah, when I fulfill the mitzvah? Is it acceptable for me to simply sit in the sukkah to fulfill my obligation? Or do I need to constructively and consciously think about this mitzvah that I'm about to perform or am performing at that point in time? Well, let us see from the Keriat Shema what exactly that obligation is. From the Mishnah, it appears that in order to fulfill an obligation, like for example the Keriat Shema, we really do need to have kavanah, positive, and we're thinking about it, we're concentrating on it, we're conscious of it, and as we begin to process the mitzvah, we actually think about the fact that God gave us this mitzvah, and we are now about to fulfill the mitzvah as we recite the words, or as we perform the action that we're doing. Even Kiddush on Friday night, or Havdalah. Is it just acceptable to recite the Kiddush on the wine and recite the Havdalah at the end of Shabbos? Or does one really need to have intention? You say to yourself in your mind, God, I'm about to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush for me and my family as I recite these words. Is it acceptable just to recite the Kiddush, or must I actively think about this as I'm performing the mitzvah? Well, this mitzvah of the Keriat Shema tells us that in order to fulfill the mitzvah, we need to have intention to fulfill it. It is no good just reading and going into a state of autopilot and allowing our lips to move as the voice comes through and we recite the 245 or 248 words as we discuss exactly how this works in the Keriat Shema. It's not acceptable to simply recite the words. Rather, we need to have intention. I am about to fulfill the mitzvah of Keriat Shema, and here I go. We need to think about that in our minds. So this is what the Mishnah taught us. And at this point in time, we now need to discuss to what degree we need to have intention. Is it acceptable to have intention only on the very first verse, or the first paragraph, or maybe the first and the second paragraph, maybe only the second paragraph, maybe the first, second, and the third, maybe it's only the second and the third? Where do I need to have intention? And that's where we left off. Tanu Rabbanan. This is where we begin. Our rabbis taught in a brisa, Vahayu. The verse says, Vahayu hadivarim ha'ele, and these words shall be. What does the expression Vahayu mean? Shelo yikra lemafreya. It means, do not read the Keriat Shema retroactively, out of order. Don't read the Keriat Shema with the wrong paragraph, meaning each paragraph has its place. The first paragraph goes in the first position, the second paragraph in the second position, the third paragraph in the third position. And obviously, don't recite the psukim, the verses, out of order. Don't say the third pasuk, then the first pasuk, then the fourth pasuk, then the second pasuk. You may not recite the Keriat Shema in this particular way. Hadivarim al levavecha. What does it mean, these words upon your heart? Says the Gemara, Yachol, you might think, Tehei kol haparsha tzricha kavanah. You might have thought that you have to have intention in order to recite the entire parsha, the entire paragraph of the Keriat Shema. Talmud loymar. That is why the Torah teaches us, ha'ele v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele. These words must be upon your heart. What does it mean? V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele. Adkan. Up until now, tzricha kavanah. One requires intention. Mikan ve'elach. From here and onwards, ein tzricha kavanah. One does not require intention, which means we only require intention up until the point when we recite these words. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Omar le Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to him, Harehu Omer. Hold on a second. It says, Asher Anochi Mitzavacha Hayom al Levavecha. That I am commanding you today upon your heart. Mikan, from here, Ata lamed. You can learn out. Shekol haparsha kula tzricha kavanah. The entire parsha in its entirety requires intention. Asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha comes to teach that actually the entire parsha, meaning to say the whole thing will be upon your heart. All of it, the first parsha. Omar Rabba Bar Chana, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Halacha ka Rabbi Akiva, that the halacha, the ruling, the law, is like Rabbi Akiva, which means one requires intention for the entire first paragraph. Intent, says the background here. This concept has two meanings with regard to mitzvot in general. The first meaning is awareness that the action being performed is a divine command. So that's the first thing that we think about. Before we perform a mitzvah, we must think in our minds that we are now about to execute a command from God. The second is appreciation of the spiritual significance of a commandment. What is actually happening when I perform this mitzvah? This form of intent is strongly encouraged, though it is not an absolutely requirement for most mitzvot, with a few exceptions, notably reciting Shema and the Amidah prayer, which means to say the most important thing before anything is to have intention that we are now about to perform a mitzvah that is given to us from Hashem. We are not just acting in a habitual manner, but rather we are about to execute a command that was commanded to us, and here we go. This gives us the credit for the command and shows us that we are servants to Hashem, fulfilling His will simply because He commanded it. The Gemara continues. There are those that teach this in the following way. In other words, that Rabbi Yochanan was really saying the following. When we learn about over here that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, above over here, he's really saying to us the following. Somebody reads the Keriat Shema, he must have intention in his heart. Rabbi Acha, Mishum Rabbi Yehudah Omer, Rabbi Acha, in the name of Rabbi Yehudah, says, since he intends his heart, he has the kavanah, the intention, in the first chapter, Shuv eino tzarich. Later on, he does not require intention, which means he only requires intention in the first paragraph of the Keriat Shema. Omar Rabba Bar Chana, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, this is the teaching. Said Rabba Bar Chana, that Rabbi Yochanan said, Halacha ka Rabbi Acha, the halacha is indeed like Rabbi Acha, She'amar, that he said it, Mishum Rabbi Yehudah. He said it in the name of Rabbi Yehudah, and as you see, it's the same thing basically. All that it is, as the Gemara very often does, is it teaches us the way that a teaching came through. Some say the teaching came through in the following direction. Some say the teaching came through in another direction. But when you look at both of the teachings, we see clearly that ultimately both of them are saying the same thing. We continue. Tanya idach, there is another teaching in another brisa, v'hayu, and they shall be. What does this mean? And they shall be. V'hayu advarim ha'ele, and these words shall be. What does it mean? V'hayu shelo yikra lemafreya, that one should not read the Keriat Shema out of order. Fine. Al levavecha, upon your heart. What does that mean? Rav Zutra Omer. Rav Zutra says, Ad kan mitzvahs kavanah. Up until this point in time, the mitzvah requires intention, said Rav Zutra. Mikan ve'elach mitzvahs kriya. From here and onwards, the mitzvah is one of just reading. Reading is different to intention. Intention is something that exists within one's heart. Reading is something that one does with one's lips. Rabbi Yoshia Omer. Rabbi Yoshia says, Ad kan mitzvahs kriya. Up until this point in time, we said al levavecha. We have the mitzvah of reading. Mikan ve'elach. From here on onwards, mitzvahs kavanah. Now we require the mitzvah of intention, which seems to indicate that it is irrelevant whether one actually pronounces the words, so long as one just simply directs one's intention to the words that one is thinking, meditating on it, that would suffice. That would be sufficient. Ma'ashana, the Gemara asks the question, what is different? Or in other words, what is the reason? It's a colloquial way of translating the word mashana. What is the reason? But that's not the literal translation. The literal translation is what is different. Mikan ve'elech. When we say over here that from here and onwards, mitzvahs kriya is the mitzvah of reading, tiksiv, because it says ledaber bam, and you shall speak in them, ledaber bam, to speak in them. Hachanami, here too also, hakasiv, it also says v'dibarta bam. Here we're referring to the two different paragraphs of the Keriat Shema. In the second paragraph, where we say ledaber bam, so this is the mitzvah of reading. But in the first paragraph, we say v'dibarta bam, meaning to say the expression of speaking in these words is in both paragraphs. And therefore, if we say that here is a mitzvah of reading and the other one is a mitzvah of kavanah, that doesn't make any sense. Because in both paragraphs, the same expression is used. Slightly different. Ledaber bam, v'dibarta bam. But still the essence of the expression is the same. So therefore, what is really different about these two things, that the one says ledaber bam and the other says v'dibarta bam, and yet we have a different reasoning as to how we perform the Keriat Shema on these two paragraphs? Hakika Amar. This is what he is saying. Ad kan, up until here, mitzvahs kavanah ukriya. We have the mitzvah of intention and reading. Mikan ve'elach, from here and onwards, kriya below kavanah. Now that makes a bit more sense. Reading, but without intention, meaning you still have to read it. There is still a mitzvah to read all these paragraphs. In the first example, there's a mitzvah to read the first paragraph. There is a mitzvah of intention and reading. In the second paragraph is a mitzvah of reading, but you don't have to have intention. Now the Gemara asks another question. Omai shana, and what is different? Ad kan mitzvahs kavanah ukriya, when we say the following expression, up until now is the mitzvah of intention and reading. Diksiv, as is written, al levavecha, upon your heart, v'dibarta bam, and you will speak in them. Hasam nami, so there also, which means once again we're speaking about the two paragraphs. In the first paragraph we say al levavecha, v'dibarta bam. In the second paragraph, Hasam nami haksiv, there too also, isn't it written? Al levavachem, ledaber bam, upon your heart, meaning in the plural form, speaking to plural, as opposed to speaking in the singular. Ledaber bam, to speak in them. So too in the second paragraph, we also have the same expression in both examples. Al levavecha, al levavachem, v'dibarta bam, ledaber bam. Therefore, if you're using this as a proof, these two expressions, but the expressions occur in both paragraphs. If they occur in both paragraphs, the rule for paragraph 1 must equal the rule for paragraph 2. Answers the Gemara. There is a difference between these two expressions. I'll answer you and tell you the following. This is required for Rabbi Yitzchak. The Omar, that Rabbi Yitzchak said, V'samtem is dvara ele, and you shall place these words of mine. Sima keneged halev. This refers to the idea that the actual words shall be placed opposite the heart. And what does it mean that the words shall be placed opposite the heart? That is the key to this whole concept over here. This, of course, is referring to the mitzvah of tefillin, in which we're not talking about the idea of speaking about the words of Torah and al levavachem over here on your heart. We're not speaking about on your heart as it applies to the idea of kavanah, ledaber bam, as it applies to the idea of speaking. Al levavachem speaks about something else. It says, how do we learn it out? From another verse. You shall place these words upon your heart. What does it mean to place them? Actual physical placing. The placing of the words are opposite the heart. Where do we place the words of the Shema opposite the heart? In the paragraphs, in the parshiot that appear on the tefillin. That is where the words appear. And so therefore it has nothing to do with the kavanah over here, but rather it has to do with the physical concept of wearing tefillin, which has the parsha of the Keriat Shema in it, at least, for example, the first and the second parshiot, in other words, not the third parsha, but the first two parshiot appear in the tefillin, and they are opposite the heart. Omar Mar, said the master, Rabbi Yoshia Omer, Rabbi Yoshia says, Ad kan mitzvahs kriya. Up until here is the mitzvah of reading, which means to say up until the end of the first paragraph. Mikan ve'elach, from here and onwards, mitzvahs kavanah is the mitzvah of intention, which comes to teach us perhaps the idea that nobody's interested whether or not we said the words, as long as we're able to think the words in our hearts, al levavachem, that is sufficient. What is the reason, or what is the difference that over here, the Eilach and onwards, mitzvahs kavanah, we have the mitzvah of intention. Mishum diksiv, because it is written, al levavachem, upon your heart. And since it says upon your heart, it comes to teach us that you don't really need to recite the words. You just need to have the intention upon your heart. This again is the teaching of Rabbi Yoshia, who's teaching us a similar idea of what we've learned before. But it's his expression. He's teaching it to us now. And he says, Hachanami, so to over here also, Haksiv al levaveka. Also in the first paragraph of the Keriat Shema, it says, upon your heart. And therefore, if this second paragraph, referring to the heart, refers to intention, but no speech, no kriya, then perhaps also the first paragraph would have the same idea. Intention, but no speech. Well, which one is it? Kriya or kavanah? Kavanah or kriya? Kavanah and kriya. Well, which one is it? Hakika Amar, this is what he said. Ad kan, up until now, which is referring to now the mitzvah, the first paragraph, mitzvahs kriya v'kavanah is the mitzvah of reading and intention. Mikan ve'elach, but from here and onwards, kavanah below kriya, all that one requires is intention without actively reading the words. The Gemara continues, Uma shena ad kan mitzvahs kriya v'kavanah. And what is different? That up until now, we have the mitzvah of reading and intention, diksiv, because it's written, al levavecha. It says it must be upon your heart. So clearly this is referring to the idea of the intention. V'dibarta bam, and speak in them. That's referring to the mitzvah of kriya. Hasamnami, the Gemara answers, there too also, hakasiv, it's written, al levavachem ledaber bam. Same argument. But now we're hearing this whole argument that is coming through from the story over here of Rabbi Yoshia. Let's just go through these notes before we continue so that when you go to the next page, we'll be ahead. Rabbi Yoshia was a member of the last generation of Tanaim. Remember, the Tanaim are the rabbis who are responsible for forming the Mishnah. They are the great outstanding rabbis that lived in approximately up until the early 2nd century. So these are the very important rabbis as opposed to the Amoraim who lived thereafter and were responsible for taking a part in being the rabbis in the Gemara, and is at times considered to be a transitional figure between the Tanaim and Amoraim. Rabbi Yoshia and his counterpart Rabbi Yonatan are among the peers in the halachic discourse, and arguments between them appear throughout the Talmud. Both Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan were primary students of Rabbi Yishmael, and they were the main proponents of his approach to halachic midrash. There is room to conjecture that Rabbi Yoshia fled to Babylonia and settled there. He may be the Rabbi Yoshia of Hutzal who transformed that city into a significant tourist center, and to whom the verse, "But the righteous is an everlasting foundation," was applied. Now we see the beauty here of the Koren Talmud Bavli, which shows us a lovely picture here. If anybody doesn't know what tefillin are, which can be quite possible. So here it is. Here's a picture of what the tefillin look like. The placement of the phylacteries of the arm must be opposite the heart. Sima keneged halev. That's what it means for samtim es devarai. Place these words upon your heart. Well, how do you place the words on your heart? Well, what do you do exactly? You put the words on your heart. We need the oral Torah to help understand what it means to put words on one's heart. What it means is take the tefillin, which has a box, and it has 4 parashiot in it. In the arm tefillin, all the 4 parashiot are written on one scroll, and they're placed inside this box over here, which are worn on the lower area of the bicep of the upper forearm the lower part of the upper arm. And here you see it is positioned on the bicep, and then of course one positions the straps in a particular order in accordance with the custom that one has learned how to put tefillin on. Placement of the phylacteries on the arm and the head. So we had the same arguments occurring again right at the end here. Ad kan mitzvahs kriya v'kavanah, mikan v'eilach kavanah b'lo kriya. And then we said, what's different? That here it says mitzvah, the mitzvah is reading and kavanah, because it says, al levavecha v'dibarta bam. There too also it says, al levavachem ledaber bam. We need to answer it up. Hahu b'divrei Torah ksiv. Rabbi Yoshia explains to us what it's referring to in the second example. When it says over here, al levavachem ledaber bam, what does it mean to speak in them over here? Al levavachem referred to wearing tefillin. What does ledaber bam speak about if it's not related to the concept of having to recite that second paragraph, but only requires kavanah? Rabbi Yoshia says the answer is it's referring to the words of Torah. Kesiv, it is written. Sorry, it is referring to Kesiv. It's written about the studying Torah. V'hakika amar rachmana, and this is what the Torah said. Agmiru b'naichu Torah. Teach your sons Torah. Ki heichi deligresu bahu, in order that they will become greatly learned in them. They become very well versed in Torah. This is a great mitzvah in the Torah. If a person has merited to become a parent and he has sons, here is a mitzvah in the Torah that we are required to perform every single day of our lives, to teach our sons Torah. Those of us who do not fulfill this mitzvah lose out on many things. Of course, for sure, they miss out on the intention. Of course, we were talking about intention, fulfilling a mitzvah and bringing one's child up with the right values. But in addition to this, let us not forget that if one does not teach one's children Torah, because perhaps one has a thinking process in one's mind that one will give one's child free choice to do whatever they want to do as they grow up. And then when my child becomes 25 years old or 30 and he's grown up in life and he suddenly starts to learn what life is all about, then he will have the opportunity to decide for himself what is best for him. Well, I can tell you, the Torah is infinite. And just learning the Chumash itself and learning the Rashi and learning how to read the words and translate them and learning the Rashi script and being able to understand what Rashi is saying and moving on to the Talmud and its Rashi and Tosafot and its Rishonim and Achronim. And then we move on to the Shulchan Aruch, where we find all the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. And then we move on to Secrets of Torah, the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah and the Kitvei Ari, and so it goes on, books upon books upon books. Well, if we do not teach our children Torah as they grow up, at the age of 3 already, we start training them that they should understand what Torah is all about. Well, if this young man develops into a fine young man by the age of 25, and we turn around to him and we say to him, and now I give you the opportunity to choose for yourself. You've got free choice. You've learned about life. Do you want to study some Torah? Well, he will have lost out effectively on 25 years of the opportunity to have grown and studied Torah as he should. What an unfortunate situation. Only one who has learned Torah and begins to delve into the secrets and the depth of what the Torah is can understand the beauty and the power and the truth of this particular statement, that when we're reading it in the Keriat Shema, where it says, L'daber bam, what does it mean to speak in them? It means, says Rabbi Yoshia, that it comes to teach us. Teach your children Torah in order that they will become knowledgeable, they'll become well-versed in it. The whole Torah will be upon their tongues whenever they speak. The only things that will come out from their mouths are goodness, Torah, holiness, godliness. This is what we require to give to our children. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught in a brisa, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, Hashem our God, Hashem is one. Ad kan tzrika kavanah alev. According to what this brisa teaches, as you can see from the language of the Gemara, many opinions are given. Rabbi so-and-so says such and such, Rabbi so-and-so says another thing. Sometimes the themes are the same, and sometimes the rabbis disagree, and sometimes the rabbis agree, and sometimes the rabbis give a slightly different point of view. And so the discussion continues with the various themes of the Gemara. Now we've discussed so far the idea of the first paragraph and the second paragraph. And now we learn in another Breita. Remember, the Breita is like a Mishnah. It is as powerful as a Mishnah, basically, but just a little bit less so, because unfortunately it wasn't included within the Mishnah, because Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi didn't feel that it was necessary to compile it within the Mishnah itself. And so it was called a Breita. But the teaching itself is like a Mishnah. So the rabbis taught in a Breita, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Ad kan tzrika kavanah alev. Up until here, we require intention of the heart. Divrei Rabbi Meir. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Omar Rava, and Rava said, Halacha ka Rabbi Meir. The halacha is like Rabbi Meir, which means to say that the real mitzvah of the Keriat Shema, in terms of intention, according to what the rabbis teach over here in this Breita, is that one really only needs to have the kavanah from that first paragraph. I mean, the first, the first sentence, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. For sure, we need to know what those words mean. We need to have intention that we are reciting the words correctly with our mouths. We aren't just mumbling, and certainly that our mouths are not in a state of autopilot, but rather we are experiencing the words that we are saying. Let us not forget, for those interested to know, the custom is that when we recite the first sentence of the Keriat Shema, that we place our hands above the eyes as we recite it, over the eyes. We place the hand over the eyes, and we close the eyes as we recite these words. And of course, we are told one of the reasons that we do this specifically, and specifically meaning at the Keriat Shema, as opposed to other parts of davening, is to have that intention. Close the eyes, do not be distracted. by all the distractions around one. What is this fellow doing on my right? What is this fellow doing on the left? This one is busy shockling, and that one is busy turning his head from left to right, and the other one is busy talking, and this one is looking at his cell phone. Do not get distracted. Place the right hand over the eyes, upon the forehead. Close the eyes. Drift off into your own world, where you can enter into a world of intention, so that when the words are being recited, one can have focus and intention on what the words are saying. Not only that, of course, but the very words themselves are telling us the secret of internalizing and understanding how we connect with God. Listen again. Shema Yisrael. Listen, Israel. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem our God, Hashem is one. First thing is, close your eyes, because so long as the eyes are open and looking out at the distractions of the world, it is very difficult to see a God who is one. Very difficult. So what is the trick? The trick is to cover the eyes and to listen. So long as we listen and we pay attention to what the Torah is saying, we stand a chance of seeing the unity and the oneness of God. But if we leave our eyes to be open and we see often the unpleasant sights around us, we can become distracted. Don't stray after your heart and after your eyes. It's so only too easy to stray after the nature of the eyes. The eyes are moving all the time, looking around all the time. We place our hands on our foreheads, covering over the eyes. With our eyes closed, we can have kavanah, intention. Shema Yisrael. Listen, Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one, in according to the simple, normal translation of the sentence. So this is what Rabbi Meir says. This is what Rava said, that the halacha is like Rabbi Meir. Now, if we look over here on the side, the halacha, intent of the heart is required at this point. Lack of intent prevents one from fulfilling the obligation only in reciting the first verse of Shema. This is the halakha. Therefore, if one recited Shema and did not have intent in the first verse, he did not fulfill his obligation. How many times did we recite the Keriat Shema? In autopilot. If so, we did not fulfill the obligation of reciting the Keriat Shema. He must repeat it and do so quietly. This, of course, is a big story, repeating it and doing it quietly, because the halakha also tells us at the same time we must be very careful never to say the Shema, first sentence, 2 times in a row. It's not correct to say it. It's considered like idolatry. It's considered like the idea of believing in 2 gods. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. This is the one God. And then afterwards you say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, as if you're talking about another God. So this is a very problematic thing. And therefore, if a person accidentally does not have intention, perhaps the best thing to do is to kind of take a break and walk around for a moment or two, distract himself, and then sit down again and do it. But it's certainly not to do it immediately, because by doing it immediately, it's as if he acknowledges 2 gods who apparently are the one God, which creates a bigger problem. But as you see, that the Magen Avraham said he must repeat it and do so quietly. If he had intent only while reciting the first verse, he fulfilled his obligation, says the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. Tanya, it was taught in a brisa. Sumakhos Omer, Sumakhos says, Kol hamarich be'echad, anybody who increases, he lengthens out the word echad, ma'arichin lo yamav ushnosav. He gets lengthened for him his days and his years. What a beautiful thought. Meaning to say, when we recite the first paragraph, the first sentence, in other words, of the Shema, the correct way of saying it is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But one has to now lengthen out this word Echad. But we have a problem over here. Let us see in a minute what the problem is. This whole thing doesn't make sense to us. I'll show you why. Omar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, said Rav Acha, the son of Yaakov, Ubadalet. You need to lengthen out the dalet, he says to us. Now think about that for a second. You would say like this, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Well, that would be lengthening out the dalet, wouldn't it? What about this? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What do you mean? That wasn't lengthening it. I didn't lengthen out the dalet. How do you lengthen out to dalet? The. So you're telling me it's Echad. There's not Echad. There's no such a word as Echad. The word is Echad. So if that's the case, you can't say Echad. There's no hey afterwards. There's no shva underneath it. There's no vowel underneath it. It's just Echad. Therefore, how could he tell us that we need to lengthen out the dalet? Omar Rav Ashi said, Ubilvad shelo yachatof bechet. And make sure, he says, don't cut off the chet. Now, what will the person do now? He'll say like this. What happened to the chet? What happened to the chet? That's not correct. So what was he saying over here? From this teaching, we learn an amazing thing. The way that we pronounce our words today is not exactly in accordance with the way that it was in all likelihood pronounced in the days of the sages at this point in time. Those of us who study a little bit about the nature of pronunciation of words in Hebrew will clearly know that there are different ways that we can pronounce letters. For example, many people are familiar with the idea that there's an Ashkenazi pronunciation and there is a Sephardi pronunciation. And then there is another pronunciation called the Taimani pronunciation, the Yemenite pronunciation. Now here's the thing. The Yemenite Jews are still to be considered the most accurate in terms of their tradition, in terms of the pronunciation that they have in pronouncing the letters of the Torah. Let me give you some examples where things differ, and you can decide for yourself as to whether or not you think perhaps I've gone crazy and I am saying things, I'm just making things, sucking these thoughts out of my thumb, or whether or not what I'm about to say carries some weight. You see, in the Ashkenazi world and in the Sephardi world, let's take certain letters. Well-known letters that we pronounce differently are a taf with a dot and a taf without a dot. In the Sephardi pronunciation, they are pronounced as t. But in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, as I'm sure those of you who have been to an Ashkenazi shul or Ashkenazi yourself, of course you'll know that the taf with a dot is a t and the taf without a dot is a s. So, for example, we say Yisborach, V'yishtabach, V'yispa'ar, V'yisroman, V'yisnaseh, V'yishadar. Interesting. But the Sephardim say Yitkadal, V'yitkadash, etc. They don't say Yiskadal, V'yiskadash. They don't say like that. But Ashkenazi do, because they pronounce those letters differently. Because if the letter has a dot in it, it must be pronounced in a certain way. If the letter does not have a dot in it, it is pronounced in another way. Another famous letter where we would find such a change occurring would be a gimel. The gimel with a dot would be pronounced as a g, and according to the Taimani pronunciation, without a dot, would be pronounced as a j, which means, for example, when we make the bracha on wine, it would not be borei pri hagafen that so many of us are used to. It would actually be borei pri hajafin, which is indeed the correct way that they should be pronouncing it. Let us take another famous letter. This is the Vav. The Vav, by our standards as Ashkenazi Jews, is pronounced as V. Interesting, because, we have another letter that's also a V. If we take a bait, and we take the dot out the bait, don't we call that a V? Well, the Torah doesn't repeat itself. And therefore, if there is a letter that describes a certain pronunciation in a certain way, we say that we don't need another letter to pronounce the same way. Therefore, how can we say that a bait without a dot is V, and the Vav, which is the sixth letter of the alphabet, is also V? Surely it should be pronounced differently. And the Taimanim have a tradition that this particular letter is not pronounced at all as a V. It is pronounced as a W sound. W. So it's Yiskadal, Yish, W, Yis, Yis, W. All the time, W. Not Yiskadal, Yiskadash. It's Yiskadal, Yis, etc. As we go through the letters, etc. Now, according to this, that letters with dots are pronounced in a certain way, and letters without dots are also pronounced in a different way. Here's the thing. A dalet is one of the other letters that is pronounced slightly different. A dalet with a dot is pronounced as d, but a dalet without a dot, according to the Taimanim, is pronounced as a th. Now listen to that. When we say it, we can extend it. Th, th. I can extend th for as long as I want to. All of a sudden, the concept of extending the word echad and continuing the dalet onwards for as long as I want to takes on a reality. Because when I pronounce it, I say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now it makes sense. I can extend the dalet. And this is exactly what the sages were saying. When we pronounce the dalet of Echad, we should extend it. But we can only extend it if we are to pronounce it in accordance with the Taimani way. So those of us who have grown up learning the Sephardi pronunciation or the Ashkenazi pronunciation will not have any clue what's going on here. And they might do something even worse. They might go Echad. But that is also incorrect, because the teaching from this brisa doesn't say that we have to lengthen out the chet. It says don't swallow up the chet. Fine. But it doesn't say lengthen out the chet. It says lengthen out the dalet. And therefore, those who go echad are also not doing correct. The correct way of doing it is echad. That is the correct way. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to change your entire pronunciation. Of course, you should ask a halakhic expert to know what you should do in the event that you felt that, well, what exactly does this teaching mean? And if I want to implement it correctly, may I at least perhaps use the Taimani way when I pronounce it on this particular word to fulfill my obligation? Perhaps. Okay, it's an interesting shaila. It's an interesting question. Now let's listen to the next teaching here. Rabbi Yirmiyah, have Yasev kamei de Rabbi. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting in front of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. He was sitting in front of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Chaziyeh tahava ma'arich tuva. And he saw him saying Keriat Shema. And he was lengthening out for a long amount of time. Amar lei, he said to him, Keivan da'amlichtei, since already you have crowned God, you've already said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, you've already crowned him. Lemaila ulamata, above and below, ula arba ruchot, and for the four sides around Hashamayim of the heavens, two lo tzrichas, more than that you don't need to do. Which means to say, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was sitting in front of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, came to teach an additional teaching about the extension of the word Echad. And that is, although that we extend the dalet, and so we must, there is a limit to how much we must extend it. It is not Echad and you go on forever, but rather to the degree that as one begins to say the dalet, one begins a kavanah, an intention to connect with what one is saying. What does one say exactly when one says the word Echad, as the Torah teaches us? Echad stands for one God. That's the Aleph of Echad. The Chet stands for the seven heavens and the earth. 7 plus 1 is 8, the numerical value of the letter Chet. And Dalet is 4, where we say that on the earth, God surrounds the earth on all four sides, north, south, west, east, and also, in fact, up and down. Now, the halacha says that when one recites this Echad, as he does so, he should actually imagine in his mind how he begins to crown the king, the one king of the seven heavens and the earth. And upon the earth, we crown him on all four directions. How is that? North, south, west, east, and up and down. But the halacha does warn one that when one begins to crown Hashem in this way, one should not do so in a process like north, south, west, and east. Because if he does so, he will form a cross in his mind. And the cross is not appropriate for a Jew to think about. And therefore, the correct approach to take when crowning the king in all four directions is to think of crowning the king north, west, south, and east. And then in that way, one doesn't come to the problem of the cross of the north, south, west, and east. He goes around in a circle, and he can even also see up and down. And in fact, if he wishes to, he can even move his eyes as he begins to think about the north, west, south, and east as he crowns God. He can even move his eyes as he's concentrating. Of course, nobody can see him doing this, because isn't that the beauty? This is exactly why he covers his eyes with his hands, that nobody should see his eyes moving inside as he crowns the king in this particular way. So according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, and he was sitting in front of Rabbi Chia Barabba, he taught him and he said to him, how long are you going to go crowning the king for? You don't have to say the dalet of Echad forever. You just have to crown the king, the one king of the 7 heavens and the earth, that on the earth you crown him over all 4 directions. Says the halacha. Omar Rav Nassan bar Mar Ukva, Omar Rav Yehudah, said Rav Nassan, the son of Mar Ukva, he said that Rabbi Yehudah said, Al levavecha, we continue our discussion, upon your heart, ba'amidah. It means to say, when you say the words, Al levavecha, say it standing up. Why should we say it standing up? Because it will have kavanah at least. Fine. That's his teaching. Al levavecha, salket daitach. The Gemara asked the question. Al levavecha, is that what enters your mind? Is that what you think? Meaning, you should just recite al levavecha while you're standing. Ela ema, but rather say ad al levavecha. Until the words al levavecha ba'amidah should be said standing up. Mikan ve'elach, from here and onwards, lo. Then you don't have to stand up anymore. How come? Because the standing up is for kavanah. So therefore, stand up, have kavanah up until al levavecha, and then it's fine. You can sit down. It's not such a big deal. Look, for Rabbi Yochanan, from here on onwards, no. For Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan said, Kola parsha kula ba'amidah. He said that the whole parsha should be said standing up. Of course, he's referring to the idea that the whole parsha should be said with kavanah. And so if you want to have kavanah, stand up, because it helps to give one kavanah. Lemaisa, practically speaking, do we really stand up for the Shema? Well, in Ishul that you go to, you'll probably notice nobody stands up for the Keriat Shema, except for the people who happen to be standing up for the entire davening. Other than that, nobody stands up for Keriat Shema. So we see clearly we don't follow this halakha. But the principle is there. And when we learn the Gemara, we learn the different opinions. The Rabbi Yochanan the Ta'amei, and Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his reasoning. The Omar Rabba Baba Chana, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabba, the son of Chana, said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Halacha karabi acha she'amar mishum Rabbi Yehudah. And there is the halacha. The halacha is according to Rabbi Acha, who said it in the name of Rabbi Yehudah, who taught us earlier that ultimately the mitzvah is to say the first paragraph of the Keriat Shema with intent. And so is the halacha. One should do one's utmost to learn the translation of those words if one can. And if not, perhaps as one recites the words in Hebrew, which is the ideal, of course, then one should glance at the English words to be aware of the power of the words that we're saying. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a Braita, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear Israel, Hashem our God, Hashem is one. Zo Keriat Shema shel Rabbi Yehudah Nasi. The Gemara informs us that this was the Keriat Shema that Rabbi Yehudah the Prince used to recite. Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah, when he would recite the Keriat Shema, he would recite Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and that would be that. Amalei Rav le Rabbi Chia, said Rav to Rabbi Chia, Lo chazeina le Rabbi de Mekabel alei malchut shamayim. I never saw Rabbi accepting. Rabbi, of course, is Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, who is referred to as Rabbi par excellence. He's just the Rabbi, the rabbi. I never saw him accepting upon himself the heavenly, the kingdom of heaven. I never saw him receiving upon himself the kingship of heaven. Amalei. Now, what basically was happening here? There was a story that was going on over here. The story is that he used to do it when he gave a shi'ur. When he was giving a shi'ur, he would say the Shema when the time for the Keriat Shema came. And that's really the story that was going on at this particular point in time. As we see over here, it says here, in the study hall in the middle of his lesson. That was what took place here. So he said that he never saw him accepting upon himself the kingdom of heaven. Omarlei, he said to him, Bar Pakde, son of nobleman, oh, here we see the source of where we place our hands over our eyes. At the time that he would pass over his hands on his face, it was then that he accepted upon himself the kingdom of heaven. Rabbi Yehudah Nasi would be giving a shiur, and in the middle of the shiur, he would kind of put his hand over his forehead. He would say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That was his Keriat Shema. And then he would continue with the shiur. Hoser v'gomra. They asked the question, does he continue and complete it? Or Eino hoser v'gomra. Or perhaps he does not return and finish it. In other words, he says Shema Yisrael in the middle of the shiur. The question is, when the shiur is over, does he then finish off reciting the entire Keriat Shema? Bar Kapara Omer. Bar Kapara says, Eino chozer v'gomra. He does not return and complete it. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Omer. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi. Guess who Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, is? That, of course, is Rabbi's son. Rabbi Yehudah Nasi had a son. His name was Shimon. So the son is telling us about the father. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Omer, he says, Chozer v'gomra. Well, who should know better than Rabbi's own son, Shimon? He said that he returned and he completed it after the shiur. Amalei bar kapara Rabbi Shimon Rabbi. Bar kapara said to him, to Shimon, the son of Rabbi, Bishlama ledidi, all is well and good according to me. The Amina, I say, Eino chozer v'gomra. I say that he does not return and complete it. You know how I know that? Because Hayenu de Mahadar Rabbi Ashma'ata de Isba Yetziat Mitzrayim. Because Rabbi returns, he would look for a teaching that had within it something to do with the exodus of Egypt. While Rabbi was giving his shiur, he would do Shema Yisrael, and then in the middle of the shiur, he would speak about a topic that he was able to relate to about the exodus from Egypt. And therefore, Bar Kapara was saying to Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, that I can tell you that your father never completed the full Shema. And the reason I say so is because during his shiur, he would seek out a reason and a teaching to be able to share about the exodus from Egypt, and in that way, it was as if he fulfilled the obligation of the Keriat Shema. But according to your opinion, the Amrat Chozer v'Gomra, that you say that he does go back and he completes it, my question to you, says Bar Kapara, is Lama lei lahadurei. Why would he have had to have searched out for some sort of a teaching all the time about the exodus from Egypt? There's no real logical reason as to why it would be. For what reason could it be that he was seeking out some sort of teaching about the exodus from Egypt in every single one of his lessons that he gave? He didn't have to say it every time. So I tell you that he did it in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Keriat Shema, and then he never completed the Keriat Shema when he finished. Whereas you say that he did complete it, you must give me a reason as to why it was that he, in fact, would seek out a lesson and a reason to also put in this teaching about the exodus of Egypt. Answers Rabbi Shimon, the reason that my father would seek out a pasuk or teaching about the exodus from Egypt, and he would still complete the Keriat Shema. The reason that he would seek it out was kedei lahaskir yetziat Mitzrayim bizmana, was in order to make mention of the exodus of Egypt in its correct time, which means when the shiur was over, he completed his Keriat Shema. He went through and finished the whole thing off. But by that stage, as we learned before, there's a time that one has to say the Keriat Shema of Shacharis. But by the time he finished saying Keriat Shema, it was too late. Therefore, he could say the Keriat Shema, but he would not be rewarded for saying the Keriat Shema in its correct time. So therefore, when he said the Keriat Shema, when he said the Shema Yisrael, and then he said the Exodus from Egypt, he was fulfilling, by saying those verses, the mitzvah of reciting the Keriat Shema in the correct time. Let's take a look at these notes before we proceed. halacha, we said intent of the heart is required to this point. We discussed that. One who extends his intonation of the word one while reciting Shema, one must extend his intonation of the word one long enough to consider that God rules the entire world in accordance with the opinions of Sumakhos and the Amoraim. One should extend his chet slightly and his dalet considerably. Look what the Magen Abraham says. The great posek Acharon, Abraham Gombina, the outstanding posek, tells us not so long ago that the correct thing to do is to extend the dalet considerably, which goes back to my discussion before, that obviously we're not reciting the dalet correctly, because to recite the dalet and extend it as we do, the word is not echad, the word is echad, but I can't extend the dalet unless I pronounce it in accordance with the way that the Teimanim do it, which is echad. And then I can extend it as long as I want to. Some say that one should not extend the chet at all, and that only the dalet should be extended. Nevertheless, he should not pronounce the chet hurriedly. It's not you can't even yadcha. That's also not acceptable. One needs to pronounce all the letters of one's prayer correctly. Until upon your heart while standing in one place. We learned that we must recite the Keriat Shema until the words Al Levarecha in a standing up position. One who is walking and wishes to recite Shema must stand in one place for the first verse. We were speaking about walking. If one is in shul, one is sitting. What about if one is walking along the way, which is one of the ways that one can recite the Keriat Shema? Didn't we say, well, we said, one needs we learned that one of the ways we can recite the Keriat Shema is along the way, as we're walking. So therefore, when we're walking along the way, what do? We stand still in one place for the first verse in order to focus with proper intent. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Natan, who says that one must stand. However, it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir as well, who holds that only the first verse requires intent. Now we were learning about Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, that he would pass his hands over his face. It is customary to cover one's eyes with one's right hand, says the Berachot, based on Kabbalistic sources, so that he will not be distracted. Isn't that what we discussed? This is based on the practice of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, who would cover his eyes when reciting the Shema. And that is the custom, that is the source of this custom of covering the eyes. Together, of course, with everything else that we discussed. Bar Pachtei, son of nobleman. This is the way the Gemara speaks often. When speaking about the different rabbis, sometimes they speak in a negative way, sometimes they speak in a positive way, sometimes they give each other nicknames. Well, sometimes they call each other Bar Pachtei, which means son of nobleman. This expression is normally interpreted as son of the great or son of ministers, Rabbi Shmuel ben Chafni. From the biblical word pecha, which obviously means ministers. Some suggest that Rav's father, who was Rabbi Chia's brother, actually held a high position in the Parthian government and was addressed with this honorific. Some of the Gaonim had a variant reading here, Bar Pa'atei, as in Pa'atei Moav, which means great men of Moav, or because he was prominent in all areas of halakha. Here again, some notes. When he passed his hands over his face, various reasons for the passing of the hand were suggested. Some say that while accepting God's dominion over the entire world, one must direct his eyes in all directions. Isn't that what we discussed? Therefore, Rabbi Yehudah Nasi covered his eyes to conceal their movement, exactly what we spoke about. Others explained that passing his hands over his face was meant to keep all potential distractions from his sight in order to facilitate proper intent, says the Rosh, and indeed, those are all the topics that we spoke about while we were learning the material together without the notes. These were the concepts that we were discussing. So we're going to leave it at that point in time. It's an excellent place to leave it because we're moving on to the next page, at least in the Koren Talmud Bavli edition. And so let's not get confused with the next subject. I thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this shiur. I'm Eliyahu Sher from Chesed to Emet, broadcasting from the holy city of Yerushalayim. And my website can be found on www.lovingkindness.co. If you've enjoyed this shiur, please like this video, give me some encouragement, make a positive comment, or even a question. I'm only too happy to see people commenting in questions or whatever it is that I can have the opportunity to answer and share further Torah. Let's learn together. Let's grow together. We grow through our mistakes. We go through everything that we learn together. So let's move ahead together. Likewise, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Share this video with family and friends. Get them to subscribe. I'm in need of further subscriptions over here. I need to increase my YouTube channel, and you can help me. So if you've enjoyed something here, please help me and give me further encouragement to move ahead even further. If you have enjoyed these shiurim on YouTube and you're getting something out of them, please consider coming to my website and becoming a partner in the activities that we're involved in. Make a difference to us so that we can continue to make a bigger difference to you and to put out more of these videos on other subjects as well. We do want to teach even more, but we need the time to be able to prepare shiurim and to edit these shiurim and put them up on YouTube. So we need your help. If you can help us, please do so. Make a difference in our lives so that we can make a difference in your life too. My email is always open. Feel free to send me an email to discuss anything on your mind about Torah, life, and growth, and I'll be only too happy to email you back and meet and talk and discuss all these wonderful things that we're learning together. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to another shiur soon and seeing you and discussing all this beautiful Torah that we're learning. Until then, I wish you everything of the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.